That's good to know. Vault 75.
Now a swatter, that's a real weapon. Talk to Mo Cronin. He'll fix you up.
This is a real weapon right here.
This better be an emergency.
Yeah. Take a look at me, Doc.
Now, go over your symptoms for me, one at a time.
Hurting all over, Doc.
Scrapes and bruises. But it's... Done. Now, was there anything else bothering you?
No other complaints.
All right.
You stumble upon the Malden Middle School while exploring Malden Center. The school is located north of the West Everett Estates along the road. When you find the school, there's no door to enter, but an entire corner of the building has crumbled into rubble. Exploring the ruin doesn't yield anything interesting until you find a jail cell. What is a jail cell doing in a school? As you walk deeper, you enter through a door at the far end, only to discover the entrance to a vault. This is Vault 75, one of the most disturbing stories in all of Fallout 4. In a previous video, I said that Hallucinogen put Vault-Tec to shame in terms of their lack of humanity and pure evil. But I was wrong. After exploring in the world of Fallout 4 than Vault-Tec. When you arrive, you find a firefight breaking out between Gunners and Brotherhood of Steel. And actually, that's not true. This encounter changes depending on the choices you make in the game. If you stumble upon Vault 75 before completing the game, the vault is inhabited exclusively by Gunners. If you side with the Brotherhood or the Railroad, then you find synths fighting the Gunners inside Vault 75. But if you side with the Minutemen or the Institute, then you find Brotherhood of Steel soldiers fighting the Gunners inside this vault. Now, the Gunners are known for taking up residence inside abandoned vaults. This is why we find them in Vault 95. But what are the Brotherhood and the Institute doing here? What could be here that would attract both of those factions? We'll get to that in a moment. Now, the sad and twisted story of Vault 75 is told between 6 different terminals in the vault. This gives us an incomplete picture of the story as we hit each of these terminals one by one until we find the final terminal. But to properly tell this, I'm going to put the different pieces together to form a chronological narrative. The admissions terminal tells us who was admitted to Vault 75. Vault-Tec, out of the goodness of their hearts, provided the town of Malden, Massachusetts with subsidized enrollment fees for any families who wanted to sign up for Vault 75. This offer was only for families who had children under the age of 15. Due to this generous
These guys are evil. They literally
the company
had
permission to
kids
build a vault
and their
underneath
parents go into a
middle
vault, they'd
school
kill the
in
parents.
Malden. The scenario went that if there was ever an apocalypse and the bombs dropped, any enrolled children and up to 2 of their parents would be allowed into the vault for shelter. The day the bombs dropped, there were 8 children registered for admittance into the vault. 4 of those 8 were siblings, so if we assume that each family had 2 parents, that's 12 adults and 8 children
What
were
actually
admitted to
bounces?
this vault the day the bombs dropped. However, 2 of these students, David and Michael Turnquist, hid from their teachers the day the bombs dropped so that they wouldn't have to go into the vault. Their father, Wayne, picked them up at school and brought them back to their own family bunker, where they stayed for months hoping that their mother, Bonnie, would find their way back home from work. I covered that story in a different video called The Turnquist Family, where I focused specifically on that family. We don't know for sure if all 4 of them survived, but I have hopes that they did. But at any rate, they did not make it into the vault. That means that 6 children and 10 adults were admitted to this vault. Now, what's disturbing about this admissions terminal is it tells us that all children under the age of 17 were taken to the vault atrium where they met with the overseer. All of the parents were taken to a holding area to await briefing from the head of security. We then learned that the adults are killed by Vault-Tec and incinerated in a furnace. All 10 of the parents who entered Vault 75...
Why even enter the vault then?
Their children were taken from them.
That's an evil thing to do. Like, it's one thing to lock them out, but one thing to actually give them a sign of hope just to kill them. That's a dick move.
Incinerated in a fire. Why would Vault-Tec do this? What purpose
This
did they
Vault-Tec
possibly
sucks.
have? It was the overseer's job to make the
Vault-Tec
children
just
feel
sucks.
as comfortable as possible. Vault-Tec tells the overseer that it's likely that the children will be upset, uncomfortable, when their parents never return. It's the overseer's job to answer all their questions and to talk with each of these children individually. Story time is important, says Vault-Tec. It's the overseer's job to tell the children stories over and over again, to soothe them. What kind of stories was the overseer telling them? Well, we learn one story when we visit a classroom terminal. In the terminal, we find a short story called Up Topland Heroes. The heroes of the story are a little girl named Sue and a little boy named Roy. In the story, they comfort a crying overseer. "Why are you crying, overseer?" says Roy. "What's wrong?" The overseer wipes a tear from her eye and says, "Children, have you ever heard of Up Topland?" "No," they say. "What is this Up Topland?" "Oh, it's a horrible place," says
Manipulation.
the overseer. And the overseer then begins to weave a story about how terrible it is outside the vault. The monsters that roam the wastes and the evil bandits that kill and steal food. "Oh, those poor people," say little Sue and little Roy. "Why doesn't anybody help them?" "Well," says the overseer, "they need somebody big and strong to protect them. One day, children, you will be the Up Topland heroes. That's why you must do your best and grow up big and strong." The lesson plans in this terminal have all been corrupted. This is the only story that survives, but if this is any indication to the kind of training that these children received to repeated brainwashing sessions, they're lucky to live in this vault. The overseer and the staff scientists are good guys on their side. Obey the overseer. Obey the scientists. Do your homework. Work hard in classes. Eat healthy. Don't forget to exercise. Stay strong. The people of the wasteland need you. In the reactor room, we find an abandoned playground. There's a baseball diamond, a swing set. It looks like the children were allowed athletic play. But in the very back of the vault, we find a target range. The gunners took over this target range and they entertained themselves by competing with each other about who could have the fastest time. The cool thing about this target practice range is that you, the sole survivor, can compete against the gunners. By resetting the course, holographic targets appear in the abandoned building. You can then shoot them, and then race into the building to shoot the targets that appear upon entry. Once done, the session ends and you can go back to the terminal and compare your score to the score of the gunners. In my first attempt I did horribly, but upon my second attempt, I finally beat all of the gunners on the terminal. In the adjacent room, we find a collection of firearms laying down on a bench and some lockers. It appears that target practice was part of the training for these children. It's clear that Vault-Tec was grooming these kids to be Up Topland heroes. They were telling them that their goal was to work hard in the vault so that they can be the saviors of the Commonwealth. Get good at target practice so that you can have lightning-fast reflexes so that you can shoot all the monsters. That was the goal of the shooting range. But we also find an exercise facility with a bunch of treadmills. The researchers' terminal tells us that these exercise sessions were so rigorous that they bordered on abuse. The goal of the aerobic station was to measure and increase aerobic ability and cardiovascular health in the children. They pushed these kids by getting the kids to sustain a target heart rate for 60 seconds, and then the researchers would gradually increase the speed until peak heart rate had been reached or exceeded. They did this to kids younger than 8 years old. The target heart rate for kids under 8 years old was 170. The peak heart rate that they pushed these kids to was 212. Most disturbingly, they only had 2 different criterias for judging the health of these kids: unacceptable and acceptable. Unacceptable performance was heart attack or death. They only stopped experimenting on the kids with the exercise machine if the kids had a heart attack or if they died. Under acceptable, we find muscle strain, nausea, vomiting, and even loss of consciousness. If any of those things happened, continue testing. So we know they told the kids that they were training these kids so hard so that they could eventually become heroes. But this is Vault-Tec. What were they really doing? We learned the full and sordid details in the Chief Scientist's terminal. The Prime Directive tells us that Vault-75 is actually part of a top-secret military program. Their goal is to improve the human genome. Their hypothesis is that the human genome can be improved at a rapid rate through the combination of selective breeding, hormonal treatments, genetic modification, and an accelerated generational cycle. They were pushing these kids so hard in optimizing their performance using hormonal treatments and genetic modification to produce a more perfect human genome. This was a multi-generational project. Vault-Tec tells the scientists that they will likely need to be replaced, and they should replace the scientists with children who, quote, graduate from the vault. If a child does not have very good physical aptitude, but displays high levels of intelligence and docility, that is, obeys orders and follows instructions correctly, then that child should be inducted into the research team. This way the experiment can go on for many generations, with the pool of researchers and scientists continually replenished by children who grew up in the vault. But what about for those who were not intelligent, but instead showed great physical aptitude? What happened to them? When the children turned 18, they were given an elaborate graduation ceremony. Everyone in the vault threw them a huge party. Finally, these children were going to Up-Topland, where they could take their weapons and save the poor citizens of the Commonwealth, the poor wastelanders who just needed a hero. The children would wave goodbye as their 18-year-old friends, who they've known all their entire lives, walked out the doors to become heroes of the Commonwealth. But instead of going to Up-Topland, the graduates were escorted to the genomics laboratory. They were sat down.
Hey there. Nice dog.
You got a deal?
Oh, I just don't want to sell her to him.
I'll take good care of her.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh.
hi.
Oh. Did you mind? You want to buy or have to?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay. Oh. Did you
Well, that stinks.
In a chair and told, it's time for vaccinations. There are so many horrible diseases in Up-Topland. Let's get you vaccinated so that you can be a savior to the world. They were given their shots, they fell asleep, and died. That's right, the scientists of Vault-75 murdered all of the 18-year-old kids who graduated showing extreme physical aptitude. Their bodies were then sent for processing, where their specific organic material was ripped from their bodies and preserved for future testing. This was only done to the absolute top performing children who turned 18 in Vault-75. were mediocre. They didn't have high IQs, so they were not recruited to the research team, and they did not show extreme physical aptitude, so their organs were not harvested to perfect the human genome. Instead, they were just incinerated. The chief scientist terminal tells us what a good year looks like. We had a very low disposal overhead this year thanks to an excellent harvest ratio. Only
That is disturbing.
74% of this year's graduating class was disposed of. That's right, on a good year, 74% of the students who graduated were simply incinerated. Only 26% of that graduating class was actually harvested for the Genome Project, which means most of the human life that grew up in this vault was snuffed out for no reason once they turned 18. But what was life really like here at Vault 75? The terminals mention breeding, but these children were killed at the age of 18. How did breeding work? Well, we learned that there was another lab here in the vault that actually bred children in petri dishes. They took
That
the
is
genetic
really
material
messed up.
from previous graduating classes and used those to forge the next batch of children to grow up in the vault. Eggs were fertilized, fetuses were altered, hormones injected, and babies were reared by robots. These babies grew up in the vault not knowing that they were engineered in a lab and told the same stories as all of the children who first entered the
That
vault
actually sucks.
generations ago. Life in the vault was all about learning and exercise, with the ultimate goal intelligence graduated to become a researcher. He was kept from any direct interaction with the other children of the vault for 15 years. This gave the other scientists and researchers 15 years to indoctrinate this new researcher into a cold-hearted scientist with no emotional attachment to any of the remaining children. The scientists would observe the residents of the vault from a laboratory that had windows on the floors where they could look down into all of the children's rooms, and rather disturbingly, even into the changing rooms. One researcher named Washington. He was one of the more recent graduates just before the end of this vault. The chief scientist terminal tells us that Washington had very low physical scores, but he consistently showed good problem solving and critical thinking. The overseer expressed concerns that Washington still had too much of an attachment to some of the younger members of the vault. And indeed, you can read on the overseer's terminal that the overseer was really uncomfortable with allowing Washington onto the research team. But the chief scientist convinced the overseer because he thought Washington had great potential. He also notes that Washington is very suggestible. They put him on the observation deck just long enough for those he had a personal relationship to graduate out of the population. This gives the scientists time to acclimate him to the experimental protocols without any conflict. Until that time, however, they keep him in the dark as to what's really going on here. In the researcher's terminal, we find notes from Washington himself. We learned that the children of the vault had all sorts of rumors as to what actually happened to children who graduated. Washington was thrilled to learn that he would be able to stay in the vault. He had an emotional attachment to another child named Nina. She was about 2 years younger than him, and he was going to enjoy watching her grow up these last couple of years. He's hopeful that they'll put her on the research team. However, in his next terminal entry, we see that he's starting to lose his attachment to the other children. This, I think, can be explained by the chief scientist when he mentioned that Washington was suggestible. By this time, Washington is starting to become a little bit more arrogant. He says, "It's only been a few months since my graduation, but I already feel so much more mature than the kids that I'm monitoring every day." Even though he raved about Nina in his previous terminal entry, he begins to criticize her performance. She is not doing too great on any of her scores. She's not much of an academic like me, but her physical scores are among the best in the group. At this point, he still is in the dark. He thinks that she'll graduate to become one of the heroes for Up Top Land. He doesn't know that she's actually going to be killed and her organs harvested. He's critical of two of the children named Robbie and Becca who sneak off to huff propellant, and he laughs and mocks two children named Rohit and James. These two kids keep on talking about taking over the vault. In his final terminal entry, Washington kind of starts to put things together. It all started with the shooting range. range. He mentioned to one of the other researchers that the shooting range was a bit dilapidated. It was getting run down. He suggested that they go and talk to some of the up-top-land heroes and have them get some supplies to refurbish the place. Instead, he was rebuked and reminded that that's not his responsibility. That's not even his
Keep forgetting to
station.
get my
He
water.
needs to stick with his job. He's an observation. He doesn't understand why it's such a big deal. He doesn't understand why they can't talk to the kids who graduated and are now heroes. Why can't we reach out to them? Are they not there? He sighs and says, well, maybe we'll just ask next year's graduating class when they get sent to the surface. Now, as you explore Vault 75, you find the skeletons of Vault-Tec scientists all over the place. Some of them are holding clipboards, some of them are holding chems, some of them wearing glasses and lab coats. These clearly are not gunners or soldiers. These are some of the research team, and they're dead. Well, what exactly happened to them? I think we can piece together what happened from the final few
Resistance.
terminal entries. We find a terminal called the Assistance Terminal. There are two registered assistants, James S. and Rohit L. I believe these were not officially scientists, but were instead children in the vault who showed great intellectual aptitude and were brought on to assist the researchers. Maybe as the generations went on, the vault's focus on physical aptitude had produced a community of children who didn't have the highest intelligence, which meant that each graduating class gave the research team fewer and fewer researchers. In this terminal, we learn that James and Rohit are planning an insurrection. They hacked into the testing schedule terminal and messed with the testing schedule for the next few days. Rohit says that he doesn't think anyone is going to notice this, and they're going to use this time to get some supplies together without any prying eyes. They're smuggling ammunition in from the firing range. They're collecting large quantities of gunpowder. Rohit and James use this terminal to leave messages for each other. We find a conversation spanning many days. The young lab assistants speculate that there still may be many graduates working in the lab. They need to prepare for all of these people when it comes time for their insurrection. They're also worried about any of the robots that may be on staff. They think they'll be able to overpower the lab assistants because, after all, they are part of the latest generation of people groomed since they were cells in petri dishes to be fast, powerful, and athletic. The lab assistants have all consistently shown themselves to be not very physically impressive. Rohit and James thinks that they can overpower them unless there are too many robots. They then plan what they're going to do with all of the little kids. Their goal is to start the attack during nap time. They're going to leave Alma in charge of the children to watch them while they fight off all of the researchers. How could this happen? Why are Rohit and James plotting an escape? What clued them in that something nefarious might be going on here? Well, the best clue I can find is in the researchers' terminal, where Washington talks about how one of his supervisors named Bissell lost some of his papers from his clipboard. He was really nervous and upset about it. He had to find those papers, and he kept coming to Washington saying, please, help me find these papers. We need to get them before the overseer finds out. Now, Washington, remember, is still in the dark. He doesn't know what's really going on here, and he doesn't understand why Bissell could be so upset. But Washington actually knows what happened to the papers. They got sucked into a vent. He heard the papers flapping up in the vent. He couldn't get to them. They got sucked downstairs to where all the children are, downstairs where he's observing them through the glass floor. He saw Rohit fish them out of a vent, and he thinks, well, I'm just gonna tell Bissell that I couldn't find them. Rohit found these papers. The papers must have been filled with damning evidence that the researchers were harvesting organs from the graduating children, that the researchers were incinerating the children who did not perform well. Rohit must have taken these papers and shown them to the other children, James and Alma, and together they plotted their escape. But surprisingly, none of the researchers seem to have taken them seriously. Washington says, we all know that Rohit and James are planning their little insurrection. I guess they never thought that they would be successful. As we explore, we don't find a lot of skeletons that are not in lab coats. We do find a few, but here's what I think happened. Rohit and James smuggle ammunition and gunpowder from the firing range over a period of time. They then choose a date and time. They arm all of the older teenagers between 15 and 17. They get Alma to watch all of the younger children who are sleeping at nap time. And then, these superhuman teenagers who have been modified with hormones and have had their genome altered since they were cells, storm the researchers, kill the scientists, destroy the robots, and open the door to Vault 75, freeing all the children and putting an end to Vault-Tec's insidious experiment. Decades later, the Gunners discover this opened vault and move on in. They set up fortifications and enjoy their chems, but then the Brotherhood hears about the Genome Project going on at Vault 75. They're not interested in technology that's run amok. They want to destroy all of that, but they're cool with genetic modifications. We learn from the Bridwin that Elder Maxon himself has been augmented in such a way that he's nearly a cyborg. This gives him much greater battle prowess. The Brotherhood must wonder what the Vault-Tec scientists learned from this experiment, and so they send
I did not know about
soldiers
Elder
to
Maxon.
retrieve whatever information they can from the vault. Simultaneously, the Institute is working on their Gen 3 synth program. Their goal is to perfect humanity. Mankind redefined, and they perfect humanity through the Gen 3 synth. They may also wonder, what secrets did Vault-Tec uncover from this experiment? And so they send their synths to Vault 75 to reclaim as much data from the Genome Project that they possibly can. This is why you find either the Brotherhood or the Institute in Vault 75 combating the Gunners. And then the sole survivor arrives to put an end to it all. No one will benefit from the evil research done in this vault. And that is the full story of Vault 75. Vault-Tec took children from parents and then incinerated those parents. Vault-Tec tortured these children until they had heart attacks and died at the treadmill. 75% of the children who reached adulthood were simply turned to ashes. The other 25%
Vault-Tec
were
sucks.
killed via lethal injection and their organs were harvested. Until one day, a teenager named Rohit discovers the evil machinations of Vault-Tec. Together with James, they rally the other teenagers, hoard ammunition, arm themselves, and revolt, freeing the remaining children of Vault 75. Together, they walk off into the wasteland, and we can only hope that they forged better lives for themselves. I have to say, this was a tough video to make. This, more than any other story I've gone over, has been one of the darkest stories from Vault-Tec. Under what circumstances can people lose so much of their humanity that this would be seen as acceptable, as necessary? Is this what happens when the ends justifies the means? Perhaps it could have all been worth it. After all, it was only a handful of lives, dozens, maybe hundreds over the decades. And the ultimate goal was a good one, perfecting humanity, making human beings better. But maybe there are some experiments mankind should just not entertain, despite how beneficial it may be to our species. What did you think of Vault 75? Were you as horrified as I was while exploring all of these terminals? Or do you think that Vault-Tec had the seed of a good experiment here? Let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. If you'd like to talk about this with other like-minded individuals, join my Oxhorn Community Discord server using the invitation link in the description of this video. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gents, I'm just so glad that you're here watching this video today. Thanks for
I'm probably
watching.
gonna invest in
Bottom of
Scrapper,
my heart,
'cause I need
and I'll see you
screws.
tomorrow morning bright and early with a brand new video.
Full story of Vault 81.
Can you see it?
No, I can't see it.
Let me check.
You?
Vault 81 lies west of Diamond City. Unlike all other vaults in the game, this one still has an active population, as if it had been used how people thought vaults were supposed to be used for the past 200 years. After a rough reception from Security Chief Scott Edwards, the overseer of the vault, Gwen McNamara, allows you into Vault 81 in exchange for 3 fusion cores. Once inside, you find Gwen talking with Calvin, who is in charge of repairs to Vault 81. We learn that Vault 81 has some shaky bones. It's 200 years old and there are bits and pieces falling apart. Everyone in the vault is working hard to make sure that Vault 81 doesn't crumble around them. As you explore Vault 81, you discover a cheery cast of characters. Austin is the first person you meet when you enter the atrium. He offers to take you on a tour of the vault if you give him a little bit of cash. His adoptive mother, Priscilla, is a botanist in the vault's hydroponic garden. She's working on making a radiation-free food, and she's happy to use you as a guinea pig. She also buys fertilizer from you for 25 caps each. Maria and Mark Somerset run the local restaurant. Maria is a grandmotherly figure, and Mark, her husband, is a laid-back old fellow. We learn from terminals that Mark has suffered from pneumonia in the past, so he might not be long for this world. Alexis and Holt Combs run the general store, and they have a little
Alexis
girl
is
named Erin.
Alexa, no.
Holt is not a very good husband or father.
Miss
He
Combs
doesn't
is like
help his
one of my
wife
favorite
run the general
NPCs in the
store,
game,
and
because she
he
sells
leaves for
the
some
Overseer's
unexplained
Guardian.
reason for the majority of the day. Because Holt is such a bad husband, if you have high charisma, you can actually convince his wife Alexis to leave him. But if you don't have high charisma, then she keeps her marital problems to herself. She has a pretty decent inventory. She can sell shipments of rarer items, including ballistic weave, fiber optics, and nuclear material, and she also sells the unique legendary combat rifle Overseer's Guardian, which shoots an additional projectile, like a 2-shot legendary item. This is an amazing gun to have if you equip an automatic receiver and if you spec into Commando. Horatio is the barber. He was not born in Vault 81. He actually moved into the vault around 10 years ago. Don't forget to pick up the Tattoos magazine in Horatio's barbershop, which opens up some additional face tattoos. There's the Overseer, Gwen. She's a capable overseer, but the stress of the job is getting to her. In addition to trying to keep the vault from falling apart around her, she's having a hard time kicking many of her vault dwellers from xenophobia. The previous Overseer only opened the vault door to the Commonwealth 10 years ago. Many of the vault dwellers don't like it when outsiders arrive. As you walk around, people comment about how you really shouldn't be there, especially if you wear power armor. Gwen is trying to do things about that, which is why she allowed you into the vault to begin with. She's hoping that you can set a good example and convince people that it's worth working with people from the Commonwealth. This is important to her because trading with members of the Commonwealth is a necessity for the survival of Vault 81. It's only through trading with Commonwealth traders who come through that Vault 81 gains access to rarer forms of food like actual meat. She has an entire entry about steak that's fun to read. The resident doctor is Jacob Forsyth and his assistant Rachel. Upon meeting you and discovering that you had been a vault dweller yourself, he requests a sample of your blood for testing purposes. The residents of Vault 81 have been breeding with each other for 200 years, and he's concerned with the lack of genetic diversity within the residents. There's Miranda, a scientist who greets you at the entrance. She's extremely hostile towards you. If you have high enough charisma, you can learn her story. Apparently, she formed a relationship with a female traveler who promised to take her all over the Commonwealth. Miranda gave the woman all of her money so that the two of them could set up a home together. But after the traveler left with all of her cash, she never came back. It wasn't until months later that Miranda learned from a passing traveler that her companion was seen together with a man in Diamond City. Since then, she has treated all Wasteland visitors to Vault 81 with animosity. There's Neil, a nice young fellow who dreams of visiting the Commonwealth, and twin brother and sister Bobby and Tina DeLuca, along with their robot Old Rusty. Bobby DeLuca is in charge of maintaining the reactor. The problem is that he's a chem addict. He's addicted to jet. Tina DeLuca, his sister, feels a lot of guilt because she was the one who introduced him to the drug and got him addicted. Everyone in the vault despises Bobby because Bobby just gets high on jet, and when he doesn't have jet, he gets drunk. He programmed their robot Old Rusty to do all of his chores for him, so he pretty much just lounges around all day. Additionally, there's a rumor going around that Tina DeLuca is having an affair with...
He cut off as it says there.
Giant open universe.
Bruh.
With Colt Holmes. This may explain why he leaves his wife's
What?
shop.
No,
for
don't download.
portions of the day. Indeed, after 10 o'clock p.m., you can find Holt and Tina together alone in one of the back rooms of the vault. There's Katie, the school teacher. When you talk with her, she tells you that she would love it if you would give a presentation to her classroom and tell them a little bit about what it's like to live in the Commonwealth. If you do, you're rewarded with Grognak the Barbarian, issue number 5. It's important that you do this quest as early as possible, because it is possible that you could lock yourself out of ever getting this magazine based on your choices in Vault 81. So, the first thing that we notice is that this vault is really weird because it's so normal. We have old folks, young families, merchants, adultery, addiction, children, and animals. It's a normal, functioning little community. That is very weird for Vault-Tec. Every single vault in the game has some horrible, tragic story. Cryopods freezing people, testing children until they turn 18 and then executing them, experimenting on people with exercise machines, mind-altering eye exams, and drugged beverages until they die. What's going on with Vault 81? Why is this place so
What's going
normal?
on with Vault 81?
Well, if you go to the reactor room where Tina and Bobby are working, you find a little guard post tucked away underneath the stairs. Inside the guard station, you find the old Overseer's terminal. It is rich with log entries from before the bombs dropped. We learned that the first Overseer of Vault 81 was Dr. Olivet. She was actually Vault-Tec's second choice for Overseer. Their first choice got sick. She's a little apprehensive about working with Vault-Tec.
Yeah, pretty sure
due to
Vault
their
81
reputation.
was actually in two areas where the scientists would experiment with the civilians, but the science part got overran by mole rats.
She learns that Vault 81 exists to experiment on humans. Normally she would expose them, but she also learns that Vault-Tec has some serious backers from the government, so she doesn't feel comfortable blowing the whistle on this. Indeed, if you go back and check out the Prime Directive terminal entry, we learn that there are 3 stages to the experiment taking place at Vault 81. Stage 1 is to culture viruses in petri dishes. Stage 2 is to expose lab animals to those viruses, and Stage 3 is to expose the Vault residents to those viruses. The goal of this experiment is to allow the scientists who are working undercover to develop a panacea, a cure for every virus and disease that has ever existed and will ever exist. To do so, they have to experiment on the Vault residents. We learn that Vault-Tec has installed nozzles in each room of the vault. When it's time for Stage 3, the scientists working in seclusion will expose the residents of this vault to all of the horrible viruses that they've been culturing within the lab animals. They are perfectly prepared for some of the residents to die, but the terminal entries make clear that the Overseer should limit the exposure so that Vault 81 always has breeding stock, so that a new generation of vault dwellers can be reared up to be experimented on. What's really disturbing is how they plan to deal with the residents of Vault 81 if there's ever an emergency and the vault needs to be evacuated. Each of those nozzles that sprays down a citizen with viruses and infects them also works as an incendiary device. The official evacuation protocol is to seal each person in their room and incinerate them to avoid them contaminating the outside population. This is the horror that Dr. Olivet discovered. She says, I feel trapped, I don't know what to do. But she finally comes up with a plan. The day the bombs drop, she's summoned to Vault 81, and she's instructed by Vault-Tec Incorporated to contact all of the vault dwellers who will live in Vault 81, as well as all of the scientists who will be experimenting on them. Olivet's plan is to simply not contact any of the scientists. If no scientists show up, then the vault dwellers can't be experimented on. The plan works really well, except that 3 scientists show up even though she didn't summon them. Jen Flint and Kenneth Collins showed up because they lived near to the vault, and they had time to get there along with the general population. The 3rd scientist, Burrow, was young and ambitious, and as an overachiever, he just showed up to see if there was going to be a drill. The good news for Olivet is that as the Overseer, she is the one responsible for deciding when the scientists move from stage to stage. Remember that Stages 1 is only developing the viruses in petri dishes, and Stage 2 is only experimenting on lab animals. It's only Stage 3 where they begin to expose the residents of Vault 81 to the viruses and diseases that they are developing. Olivet makes a tough decision. She sabotaged all of the delivery nozzles in each and every room of the vault, making them inoperable. And then she locks the 3 scientists away in the scientific portion of the vault, where they will live for the remainder of their lives until they die. It's a tough choice for the first Overseer of Vault 81 to make, but it's the only solution she could come up with that keeps the residents alive. we find what appear to be instant messages between Olivet, the Overseer, and the 3 scientists in the sealed-off lab portion of the vault. Apparently, this IM system was the scientists' only way to communicate with the Overseer. We learn that the scientists start to get a little suspicious of Olivet almost immediately when only 3 of the scientists show up. We learned that the lab animals that they inject with these diseases during stage 2 are actually an already highly modified version of mole rat. One of the scientists, Dr. Collins, says that he thinks Vault-Tec must have been running some experiments on them. They're unusually large, they demonstrate bioluminescence, and some appear to be more intelligent than normal. Burrow, one of the scientists, was one of the first to discover that Olivet had tampered with the delivery mechanisms. He was going to expose the
Are you kidding me?
to some sort of
I can't
placebo,
buy
and that's how
this.
we figured out that they had been tampered with. And at the very end, we see where Olivet completely cuts them off. Dr. Collins tries to get in touch with the Overseer. Doctor, please, get in touch.
Aluminum,
He says that he honestly
foil,
doesn't blame her.
adhesive.
He recognizes that performing experiments on non-consenting humans is a breach of ethics. But he also recognizes that this is not the same world that they used to live in. He ends by saying, I never thought that you'd actually leave men for dead. Please, Olivet, reconsider this. So whatever happened to the 3 scientists, Dr. Flint, Dr. Collins, and Dr. Burrow? And where is this hidden laboratory? You don't stumble upon it anywhere in the vault. Well, to access this part of the vault, first you need to go to Dr. Forsyth and agree to have him take
got a
your
few minutes
blood.
to browse.
That's a hidden requirement to proceed any further with this quest. Next, give a presentation to the school children in Katie's classroom, just so that you can make sure to get the Grognak the Barbarian magazine. Get that out of the way for now. And then, talk to young Erin Combs. She lost her cat, and she needs you to find it. Her cat is easy to find. Leave the vault, walk around the lake, and you'll find the cat sitting on the dock. Tell the cat to go home, because apparently in this world, cats actually follow directions, and then follow the cat back to Vault 81. When you get back, we learn that young
Hey,
Austin,
Solomon.
the adopted son of Dr. Pensky, was bitten
Sure.
by a mole rat.
Gotcha.
Apparently, this mole rat was infected with some strange disease that Dr. Forsyth had never seen before. In comes Bobby DeLuca, and he explains that he found a hidden door in the reactor room where he had been storing all of his chems. Young Austin saw him stashing his chems in that door, and that is where he must have gone to get bitten by the mole rat. When you follow Bobby down to the reactor, he opens up a secret passage in the side of the wall. This allows you access to the hidden laboratory of Vault 81. The hidden laboratory is an absolute ruin. There is dirt and broken equipment everywhere. X688 remarks that it looks like Vault-Tec had intended this to be an expansion of the vault, which they never got around to finishing. As you wander around the ruin, you will come across pre-war robots and turrets that you have to defeat, as well as exceptionally strong mole rats called Vault 81 mole rats. Now be careful around these mole rats, because if you allow them to bite you, you have a chance of getting a unique disease called the Vault 81 mole rat disease. This reduces your HP by 10, and none of your chems or medication can cure you. Later on, you are presented with a moral choice that forces you to choose between curing somebody else or getting stuck with this disease forever. So your best bet is just to not get the disease at all. Kill the mole rats before they can sink their teeth into you, and save often. Along the way, you
I
find
love doing that.
observation.
That makes me so happy.
Scientists would observe the residents of the vault. From here, you can overhear conversations currently going on inside the vault.
Well, this is gonna be a joy for you. You get to nag me and I can't go.
Oh, real nice, Holmes. Make this about you. Don't you think about anyone other than yourself? Your daughter could get sick like Austin, and you're whining about spending time with your family?
I have things to do. We don't have to hide away in here.
You're so busy, Holmes. You have so much to do. Please, explain to Erin why your needs are more important than her needs.
Never mind.
I really wanted that kill.
At length, you'll find yourself in an atrium. At the top of the atrium, at the end of the balcony, you find a terminal with a holotape that contains a key. Next to the key, we find a communications terminal. This is the terminal that the
Bro, I am
scientists
suffering
use
from a
to
lack of
instant
resources
message
and a lack of
the
XP. It's starting to
Now
get
that you
slow.
have the key, go back around to the locked door where we find a Mrs. Nanny robot on the other side of a window. She claims to have a cure that can cure young Austin, but before she'll give it to you, she wants you to give her permission to leave the vault. She assumes that you're a Vault-Tec employee. What's really funny about this is even if you explicitly say that you are not from Vault-Tec and you do not give her permission, she says,
My audio circuits must be malfunctioning. I distinctly heard you say yes.
and she lets you in anyway. However, the problem is that she only has one sample of the cure remaining. She explains that the rest have all expired. Don't forget to pick up the medicine bobblehead in Curie's laboratory. Inside the terminal, we learn a little bit more about the motivations behind the experiments that went on here at Vault 81. The entire purpose was to develop some sort of vaccine used to wipe out every single disease that the human race has ever experienced. Vault-Tec provided the scientists here at Vault 81 with a robot called the Contagions Vulnerability Robotic Infirmary Engineer, also known as Curie. They've provided the scientists with centuries worth of biological and chemical supplies. They included the genetically adapted mole rats and, most importantly, a vault full of test subjects. They hope that over many generations, the scientists here will develop a disease-resistant group of humans. Maybe this is a worthy goal, but their methods are truly barbaric. We learn more into the mindset behind Vault-Tec with this line in paragraph 3. As with all great progress, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That phrase is actually a direct quote from Spock in the 1982 movie The Wrath of Khan. It's funny that Vault-Tec here would be directly quoting Spock, but the ideology is certainly not unique to Star Trek. The basic concept originated with a philosophy known as utilitarianism, most notably perpetuated by Jeremy Bentham, who said that it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong. I personally disagree with that world philosophy because there are a whole lot of horrible things that make a whole lot of people very happy. In the back of the room, we find another terminal named Curie's Terminal. On that terminal, we learn a little bit more about Curie and where she came from. Curie is the result of one of the scientists who was trapped in that wing of the vault named Kenneth Collins. When it became clear to Collins that he was going to spend the rest of his life in that vault, he started to tinker with Curie to pass the time. He hopes that Curie will speed up their lab work. Over time, he begins to tweak her personality a little bit. He molds her personality, partially after a woman named Lisa, whom we assume is his wife. He mentions that he hopes that she got into a vault in DC, and a little bit after a grad school fling of his, whom he met back when he was in Versailles in 2046. He also programmed her to have a full understanding of a variety of philosophers and scientists, including Marie Curie, who was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, and the only woman to win it twice. She's notable for doing pioneering research into radioactivity. Kenneth names the robot
I love Curie. She's cool.
Which can coincidentally, or perhaps intentionally, be used to
Scientist Curie. She's pretty badass.
Robotic Infirmary Engineer, which is her official name. Over time, he starts to develop a human attachment to Curie and insists that the other scientists treat her like a human. Even though she's a robot, her feminine presence in the lab, in his words, makes the scientists feel a bit more grounded. Ultimately, Collins gets to the point where he no longer feels right tweaking Curie's personality, because in his words, he says that her personality feels as genuine as his own. He says that it's moving to see her struggle with very human concepts like mortality. His greatest wish is that one day Curie would be able to explore the world outside of the vault to see the blue sky that she only knows about from his songs. I think it's really touching that Collins sang to Curie to pass the time. But eventually, as time went on, the scientists began to die out. The first one to die was Flint. The second one to die was Burrow. And finally, Collins himself succumbed to old age and died. According to his wishes, Curie cremated him and placed him in a jar. In fact, outside of the office, we find 3 lockers lying on the ground decorated with candles and flowers. 2 of them are filled with complete skeletons, and 1 is filled only with a jar. Now that you have the cure, you have to make a tough choice. When you exit the secret lab and return to Vault 81, go back to Dr. Forsythe and you find Austin lying on a bed, not moving.
You can make one of the most evil choices in Fallout 4 right here. You can either cure yourself or you can cure the boy. There's only one cure available.
Because if you do, you have to make this very tough moral decision. But if you don't, then it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, you could be insanely evil right here.
Austin, you're stuck with the mole rat disease forever. There is no cure for it. But if you don't, Austin dies.
Let him die.
That is an evil decision.
Are you really willing to let Austin die just to earn a few caps?
He can die for all I care.
A bit of everything.
There's one more dead child in this world.
No wonder we don't
Wow.
let Commonwealth people into the vault. You are a cold, selfish bastard. Get out of my sight.
This is one of the few moments in Fallout 4 where we actually witness the death of a child. You find his corpse lying in exactly the same position where he was on his sickbed. As you walk around the vault, all of the vault members have new dialogue options, and they're all pretty upset with you.
I've seen a lot of selfish acts in my day, but yours will be one to remember. Austin was a child. He had a full life ahead of him, while yours would have been just as long, infected or not. I trust you can see yourself out.
You should be ashamed of yourself, letting a kid die like that.
Boy, I can't remember ever losing a child in 81. It's gonna take a long while for folks to move on after this one.
Lots of buzz going around on your involvement in Austin's death, but I ain't want to judge.
First you murder my boy, then you want to talk? I don't think so. Why couldn't you have saved him? Damn that Bobby Toluca. Between you and him, I don't know who to blame more.
I heard you let that boy die. I don't see how any of you sleep at night. Your decision cost the boy his life. I hope you can live with that.
To think I actually wanted you to speak to my class. You didn't just let Austin die. You killed that poor boy. What kind of person?
Yeah, they really turn on you.
Please leave me alone. I don't even want to see you right now.
This is why I recommended giving the talk before Kate's classroom earlier in the game rather than later, because if you waited until now, and if you let Austin die, Kate
if you go in with like
refuses to
critical
talk,
banker.
which locks you out of the Grognak comic forever. The residents also set up a memorial shrine for young Austin in his classroom, comprised of flowers and what appear to be his favorite toys. There's no benefit to choosing this option. The only reason to do so would be mainly for role-playing reasons. The alternative, to give the cure to Austin, gets you a lot of really cool rewards. Not only is Austin saved, but Gwen gives you a unique player home in Vault 81. This is one of only 4 player homes in the entire game. One, of course, is Home Plate, which you have to buy for over 2,000 caps in Diamond City. The other you only get for siding with the Brotherhood of Steel, and the other you only get for siding with the Institute. This player home does not have a workshop, so you can't add workstations or decorate it in any way, but it does have a bed and a bobblehead stand. Incidentally, Eleonora has made a wonderful mod that transforms this player home into a fully functioning player home with all the amenities that you actually need to play the game. I link to it in the description of this video, and it is available on the Xbox One and PC. And you're also gifted a Syringer rifle from Dr. Forsyth. You can find these elsewhere in the game, but they're pretty
I'm gonna be right back. I want milk.
They're not really.
I need some milk. Apparently I'm gonna have to get to a better level. Or I need some loot. I might try. Yeah, I have nothing I have to do in this game except for one thing. We're doing this.
In my opinion, I find them to be cumbersome and tedious to
I'm eating
use,
chocolate,
with
by the
no
way.
real
Give me a second.
appreciable benefit in combat, but it is a rare item. Additionally, many of the items in Vault 81 that were previously set to owned have that tag removed, meaning that you can loot the items without the entire vault turning against you. This is only true on some floors of the vault. You still get in trouble if you take things from private bedrooms. Curie now becomes available as a companion. If you allow her to travel with you, you fulfill the dying wish of Dr. Collins, that Curie would someday be able to explore the Commonwealth and see the blue of the sky. If you decide that now is not the time, she'll be waiting for you here at Vault 81. There's a whole lot more to deal with Curie, but that's a longer video for another day, so I'll leave her story at that. Before you leave, make sure you go back to the reactor. There you find Tina DeLuca, who talks to you a little bit about her brother.
I need someone to get him off the jet. Ever since I left Drama, he's gotten worse. He's in his room, high all the time. Rachel said if he doesn't get hurt,
This is an emergency broadcast.
Here, like with Austin, you have two choices.
One in the vicinity can come help. Now's the time. Ada, loop this message.
Yes, sir.
This is an emergency broadcast.
Fight with you, in which case you kill him, or you can actually give him Jet to feed his addiction. If you do give him Jet, when you leave the vault and come back, you find him lying dead on the floor. This causes you to fail the quest, and at least in my game, Tina DeLuca refused to speak with me anymore. Or, if you have high charisma, or if you have enough chems with you to get your charisma high enough, you can pass a few speech checks that encourage him to go seek help for Hitler at one of your settlements. It's a red speak check. It is not easy, but it is possible. Note that this entire exchange is highly bugged. I managed to get it to work well in my gameplay, but there are many people who complain that even though they did everything right, they can't recruit Tina. She never shows up at their settlement. There are a variety of PC console commands you can use to force Tina to join your settlement as a settler if she glitches out, but sadly these don't work on consoles. There's no major benefit to recruiting Tina as a settler. She does have unique inventory if you make her a merchant in one of your settlements. There are also some good lore reasons for recruiting Tina DeLuca. Number one, it removes her from Vault 81 so that she no longer has an affair with Holt Combs. This could potentially lead to Holt going back to his wife and their relationship healing. And number two, Tina is constantly complaining about spending time in the vault, and this way she does at least get to explore the world. And that, my friends, is the full story to Vault 81. There are a lot of moving parts at this vault, but it was fun to go through the entire thing again and organize it into this short story. What are your thoughts on this location and this series of side quests? What decision did you make? Did you give the cure to young Austin, or did you keep it for yourself? Do you like the fact that Bethesda is making you choose between being stuck permanently with the disease or saving some NPC? Is the unique player home?
We shouldn't approach this. We got murdered last time here.
Tina DeLuca and her brother.
I was here on
compelling story.
my ultra hard, or my very hard playthrough, and that was hell. We have some pretty good protection. Now we need to get some. I'm just gonna jump out of the building real quick. Jenna! Ooh. I need an automatron. Listen, Dogmeat, I love you, but automatrons are the best deal. Are the best. They don't need sim packs. I'm gonna blow your goddamn head off. Oh, that was brutal. Ooh, TV dinner trays. I need those. I love the Automatron DLC. I think it's my favorite. $71 XP for that? That's not bad. And plus, you can get like fusion cores from these dudes.
My friends, did not you are leaving. My friends did not survive the attack. Thank you for assisting.
Uh-huh. Are you okay?
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry for your loss.
Even with the weapon and detection up,
Tell me about these robots.
they roam the common settlers. We knew
You couldn't have known something like this would
the
happen.
probability. It's.
You'll need help if you want to succeed.
I'm aware of it. You have shown. In return, I can give you.
You want revenge.
I wish to prevent. Now you may find. I will follow.
It's like shaking its arm.
General Atomic.
Sorry, buddy. I love having Ada, because she always says, make sure you don't leave anything useful behind. That is the mentality. No! Thank goodness I slept right before I left that day.
And what decision did you make? And is having Tina as a settler at one of your settlements worth it? Let me know.
Hate the Institute, blame Sean, Red Team.
Why
Why did I side with the Institute my first playthrough? That was... Dude.
Break through the enemy's defense line. Jet aircraft tear through the sky. The nuclear blast let loose.
My friends did not survive.
Welcome, brothers and sisters, to this week's sermon, and we are going to take a small trip to a little place known as the Institute. The Institute is rather controversial among the fans, largely because as a faction, their purpose is not entirely clear, whereas the other factions have easily definable goals, whether it's the Railroad freeing synths or the Brotherhood seeking to destroy synths and synth technology. As it's regarded as a technological abomination, the Institute lacks a clearly defined goal. Not only that, the Institute regularly acts in contradicting manners, declaring, at times, a concern for the surface, while simultaneously actively harming the inhabitants of the surface. Much of this is chalked up to the faction being just a bunch of scientists just doing science things, and therefore, it doesn't have to make sense. But that is not the case. No, Sean, or Father, as I will refer to him for the rest of this video, leads the Institute, and for a multitude of reasons, is to blame for the Institute being the way it is. Father is a rather awful leader, and he is largely responsible for the Institute that we get in-game. So crank up the rads, and let me show you why it's almost all Father's fault. First, it's important to establish that not everything that is wrong with the Institute, or that the Institute has done wrong in the past, is because of Father. Some of the first events that made the Commonwealth inhabitants fearful and distrustful of the Institute were the Broken Mask incident in 2229, where a third-generation synth who was unauthorized to be allowed to act independently on the surface lost control and murdered several people in Diamond City. The second was the massacre of the Commonwealth Provisional Government, an attempt by several groups of people in the Commonwealth to create a cooperative government. This was perpetrated by another Generation 3 synth in the 2230s after the Institute stopped sending representatives because of a lack of progress. Lastly, the Institute routinely abducted Wastelanders to subject them to FEV experimentation and then release the resulting super mutants topside. These events caused the service to be extremely distrustful of the Institute, and Father took that already poor general opinion of the Institute and said, "Hold my Nuka Dark." Father's main problems lie in roughly 4 distinct but interconnected areas. Father is a bad scientist, a rather awful trait for someone that is to guide and direct a body of scientists laser-focused on scientific progress. Father is unable to be honest. Whether this is with himself or others isn't always clear, but regardless, they have the same detrimental effect on the Institute. Father has major personal issues that he has not worked through well or in a constructive manner. This has an impact on his decisions, and it jeopardizes the Institute and its goals. And finally, Father's proclivity to nepotism and familial preference also puts the Institute at undue risk, something that is inexcusable as a leader. Many of these points are mostly, but not entirely, reflected in 3 significant events. The first is the continuation of PvP research and the resulting disaster. The second is Father's persistence in creating a synth child modeled after him, who I'll be calling Synth Sean. And third, the decision to release the Soul Survivor from Vault 111, kicking off the story of Fallout 4. First, let's examine the evidence that shows that Father is not a scientist.
No, they're not weightless, but they're really...
Let's give Father the benefit of the doubt here and say that, at one time, he was a good scientist. When speaking with the Soul Survivor, Father mentions that he had a specific gift when he came to the sciences. Therefore, it is unsurprising that he rose through the ranks after decades to become the director of the Institute. Although we are not aware of any of his specific scientific contributions, or even what division he worked in, many of his actions as director that we know of cast doubt on his claim to being a competent man of science. Although the Institute's FEV program began well before Father was even a member of the Institute, it would continue on to run for decades, from 2178, when clearance was first given for FEV research, to 2286, when the last lead scientist to run the program, one Dr. Brian Virgil, destroyed the lab and escaped the Institute, forcing the program to close. While the actions of Virgil do seem drastic, they become more understandable when you learn that the FEV program had been on autopilot ever since synthetic organics were successfully developed and spun off of FEV research. The research scientists were given no clear goals, and year after year their experimentation showed no deviation from the previous year's results. If you do not have clear research goals, properly planned and executed experiments, and clear repeatable hypotheses, then you are not doing science. Forcing researchers to blindly run tests on groups of unwitting individuals with no clear
and that
purpose
experiment has literally made the game harder.
adhere to the scientific method, and it is no surprise that there is no approach. Father commissioned a project to create a child synth, something that has not been attempted before. This child synth was an exact copy of himself as a child, a frankly quite baffling move that was never given a reason to the researchers he ordered to work on the project. It is only justified once in a conversation with the sole survivor, where Father calls the decision a natural one, since the Institute had records of his genetics and physiology. Once the project was largely complete, Synth Sean was put into an observation site so that he was the first person the sole survivor would see when they finally come into the Institute. No matter how the conversation between Synth Sean and the sole survivor goes, Synth Sean gets distressed and has to be shut down by Father, at which point Father will declare that the interaction was fascinating but disappointing. Father mentions that they gained insights into their hardware and software based on the Synth Child project, and that it was a vessel for exploring the effects of extreme stimuli. This all seems like dressing, however, since Father asked the sole survivor several questions that hint his true curiosity with the project. He asks,
I love having Ada as a companion.
I'm curious. As a parent looking for a child, looking for the younger version of me, what do you think? Do you think you could love him like you would a real boy?
That is the closest we ever get to a mention of any sort of expectation from the project, which itself is the closest thing we get to any sort of hypothesis. To state things more clearly, Father wants to know, can the sole survivor love Father, seeing as Synth Sean is identical in appearance, behavior, and demeanor to the real Sean, albeit quite younger. After the initial meeting with the sole survivor, Father doesn't speak about the interaction between the sole survivor and Synth Sean again, until the end of the game, regardless of whether the player chooses to side with the Institute or not. Father will request that Synth Sean be put in the sole survivor's care, asking that Synth Sean either be given a chance to be a part of the future of the Commonwealth, or that Father hopes that Synth Sean and the sole survivor can have a chance at being a family. Since Father never elaborates to the scientists who created Synth Sean, and never explains to the sole survivor what scientific purpose the child serves, Synth Sean was only created under the guise of a scientific project to justify diverting resources for personal reasons. Few things are as anti-science as personal projects executed under the guise of an experiment that has no scientific basis. Speaking of bad experiments, let's look at the worst of all so-claimed experiments that Father has performed. The sole survivor was refrozen after Kellogg abducted infant Sean, left, as Kellogg said, as a backup. Decades later, the sole survivor would be unfrozen and start his journey to find his son, avenge his wife, or dick around building settlements.
Hey, that's
Father
me.
states specifically that he decided to thaw out the sole survivor to, and I quote, see what would happen, an experiment of sorts. His only saving grace is describing the action as an experiment of sorts, but it is still important to point out that releasing the sole survivor to just see what would happen is itself not an experiment. With how much care it takes to plan and execute valid scientific experiments, it is a rather sloppy choice of words from someone who knows better. And so now we have the last major point that shows why Father is not a good scientist, a bad attribute to have for a community built solely on the advancement of science. The Institute at one time had a cybernetics program, and it appeared to be quite successful. The only known experimental specimen was Kellogg, the game's initial antagonist, whose body was augmented in several ways that allowed him to far outlive his natural lifespan. The very compelling success of these cybernetic enhancements even caused some jealousy amongst Institute scientists, who wished to also benefit from cybernetics just as Kellogg had. Father would single-handedly nix the entire program, however, discontinuing any and all development and leaving Kellogg as the only known example of just how impressive and beneficial the Institute's cybernetics research really was. So what could possibly justify the discontinuation of a wildly successful program? This belief that Father holds. Quote, the Institute is about preserving humanity, not some bizarre amalgamation of biology and technology. While Father does express some regret about eliminating the project, it wasn't enough to save the project or restart it at all, because he believes that the Institute should not be involved with meshing biology and technology. Except that is exactly what the entire Generation 3 synth program is about. If inserting mechanical components into an organic body is an unholy marriage of technology and biology, then how is a synthetic organic body based on human DNA, given organs and a neural system that match a human exactly, given biological behavioral patterns that perfectly represent humans, and lastly, given either real or synthetic human memories that cause the synths to react, behave, and emote in a way that perfectly emulates humans, not the same. How is that not a mixture of technology and biology? That is using existing biology, like human DNA, biological elements like human behavior, and biological experiences like memories, in a synthetic body created only through the advancement of technology. Considering cybernetics as an unacceptable mix of biology and technology is a remarkable point of hypocrisy. Considering the Gen 3 Synth project is arguably even more of a mix of biology and technology. Father just prefers one over the other and uses a hypocritical stance to justify it. Maybe there is a personal bias, since his DNA is what makes the synths and he feels a connection to that project. But he is not objectively looking at the pros and cons of the cybernetics program, and thereby coming to a conclusion to proceed or to kill it. He makes a purely opinion-based decision. It is even more condemning when we remember what was previously covered with the FEV program. Research that had not produced any tangible results for years upon years, yet was not revamped, halted, or stopped until the lead researcher destroyed the lab.
I guess,
Father
yeah,
is not a
if I can see.
because he is not looking at the research on the merits of the progress being made and the advancements that are achieved. He pushes dead research and halts promising research because he feels so inclined. Is it really necessary that the leader of the Institute be a good scientist, or even a scientist at all? Not necessarily, but just as the head of a science department in a university, for example, should have a good grasp of fundamentals of science and the scientific method, the leader of a technocracy who puts all of their resources into the advancement of science should at the very least understand good scientific methodology. experimentation, and productive research. Father seems to fall short of this standard.
Sure. Let's take a look.
Yeah, now I agree. The father is starting to sound like a little bit of a hypocrite
So while
here.
Father may not be a great scientist anymore, if he ever really was one, that is really the least of all the reasons why Father is an awful leader of the Institute, and largely responsible for the opaque goals and confusing actions of the group. Father has an inability to be honest, holds contradicting views,
interesting.
and uses either deliberate dishonesty or an apathetic pursuit of knowledge to justify his beliefs and actions. First is the most understandable of all deceptions. Father's health is failing as he has contracted an incurable